August 23, 1847. A scream tore through the upper floor of Whitfield Manor in Albemarle County, Virginia. The master's wife, Catherine Whitfield, was in labor with her first child after 3 years of marriage. In the birthing room, an enslaved midwife named Hannah pressed a cool cloth to Catherine's forehead and prepared to deliver what everyone assumed would be the legitimate heir to one of Virginia's most prominent tobacco plantations. What Hannah knew, and what she would whisper in Catherine's ear 47 minutes after the baby took its first breath, would destroy that family completely and expose a secret that had been hidden for 23 years. This is the story of how enslaved women carried knowledge that could topple the very system designed to keep them powerless. Whitfield Manor stood on 1,100 acres of prime tobacco land in Albemarle County, approximately 15 miles from Charlottesville. The plantation had been in the Whitfield family since 1784, passed from father to eldest son through 3 generations. By 1847, Thomas Whitfield III owned 132 enslaved people who worked the tobacco fields, the household, and various support operations that made the estate function. The hidden dynamics of plantation life contained secrets that owners desperately wanted buried. Stay with this story to understand how enslaved women held power that their masters never imagined. Among those enslaved workers was Hannah, age 46, who had been born on a neighboring plantation and purchased by Thomas Whitfield II in 1819. Hannah had learned midwifery from her own mother, who had learned from her grandmother, carrying forward knowledge that originated in West Africa and had been adapted to the brutal conditions of American slavery. By 1847, Hannah had delivered over 200 babies, enslaved children, white children from the main house, and babies from neighboring plantations when their owners requested her services. Enslaved midwives occupied a unique position in the antebellum South. They witnessed the most intimate moments of both white and black families. They heard confessions spoken in the delirium of labor. They observed physical characteristics that revealed uncomfortable truths about paternity. And because white society generally dismissed enslaved people as incapable of sophisticated reasoning, these women's observations were often ignored until it was too late. Hannah had been present at Catherine Whitfield's wedding to Thomas Whitfield III in June 1844. She had served at the reception, watched the young bride dance with her new husband, and heard the toasts celebrating the union of 2 prominent Virginia families. Catherine was the daughter of Henry Blackburn, who owned a smaller but profitable plantation 30 miles south in Buckingham County. What the wedding guests did not know, and what Catherine herself would not discover for 3 more years, was that Thomas Whitfield III and Catherine Blackburn shared the same father. Catherine's labor had begun at dawn and continued through the sweltering August heat. Virginia summers in the Piedmont region were oppressive, with temperatures reaching into the 90s and humidity that made breathing feel like drowning. The birthing room's windows were open, but the air barely moved. Hannah had attended Catherine throughout the day, along with 2 younger enslaved women who assisted with water, linens, and whatever else the midwife required. Thomas Whitfield III paced in his study below, following the custom that men did not attend births. His mother, Eleanor Whitfield, sat in the parlor with 2 neighboring plantation mistresses who had come to offer support. At 4:17 in the afternoon, after nearly 10 hours of labor, Catherine Whitfield delivered a healthy boy. Hannah caught the infant, cleared his airway, and wrapped him in prepared linens. The baby's cry announced his arrival to the household below. But as Hannah cleaned the newborn and prepared to hand him to his mother, she saw something that made her hands momentarily still. The baby had a distinctive birthmark on his left shoulder blade. 3 dark spots arranged in a triangle, each about the size of a kernel of corn. Hannah had seen that exact birthmark twice before in her 28 years at Whitfield Manor, once on Thomas Whitfield II, the baby's grandfather who had died in 1843, and once on a girl named Sarah, born 23 years earlier on the Blackburn plantation. Sarah Blackburn, who was now Catherine Whitfield. Enslaved midwives developed extraordinary observational skills out of necessity. Their survival and their limited autonomy depended on understanding the hidden dynamics of the families they served. They witnessed the most intimate moments of both white and black families. They heard confessions spoken in the delirium of labor. They observed physical characteristics that revealed uncomfortable truths about paternity. And because white society generally dismissed enslaved people as incapable of sophisticated reasoning, these women's observations were often ignored until it was too late. Hannah had been present at Catherine Whitfield's wedding to Thomas Whitfield III in June 1844. She had served at the reception, watched the young bride dance with her new husband, and heard the toasts celebrating the union of two prominent Virginia families. Catherine was the daughter of Henry Blackburn, who owned a smaller but profitable plantation 30 miles south in Buckingham County. What the wedding guests did not know, and what Catherine herself would not discover for 3 more years, was that Thomas Whitfield III and Catherine Blackburn shared the same father. Catherine's labor had begun at dawn and continued through the sweltering August heat. Virginia's summers in the Piedmont region were oppressive, with temperatures reaching into the 90s and humidity that made breathing feel like drowning. The birthing room's windows were open, but the air barely moved. Hannah had attended Catherine throughout the day, along with 2 younger enslaved women who assisted with water, linens, and whatever else the midwife required. Thomas Whitfield III paced in his study below, following the custom that men did not attend births. His mother, Eleanor Whitfield, sat in the parlor with 2 neighboring plantation mistresses who had come to offer support. At 4:17 in the afternoon, after nearly 10 hours of labor, Catherine Whitfield delivered a healthy boy. Hannah caught the infant, cleared his airway, and wrapped him in prepared linens. The baby's cry announced his arrival to the household below, but as Hannah cleaned the newborn and prepared to hand him to his mother, she saw something that made her hands momentarily still. The baby had a distinctive birthmark on his left shoulder blade, 3 dark spots arranged in a triangle, each about the size of a kernel of corn. Hannah had seen that exact birthmark twice before in her 28 years at Whitfield Manor, once on Thomas Whitfield II, the baby's grandfather who had died in 1843, and once on a girl named Sarah, born 23 years earlier on the Blackburn plantation, Sarah Blackburn, who was now Catherine Whitfield. Enslaved midwives developed extraordinary observational skills out of necessity. Their survival and their limited autonomy depended on understanding the hidden dynamics of the families they served. They witnessed the most intimate moments of both white and black families. They heard confessions spoken in the delirium of labor. They observed physical characteristics that revealed uncomfortable truths about paternity. And because white society generally dismissed enslaved people as incapable of sophisticated reasoning, these women's observations were often ignored until it was too late. Hannah had been present at Catherine Whitfield's wedding to Thomas Whitfield III in June 1844. She had served at the reception, watched the young bride dance with her new husband, and heard the toasts celebrating the union of 2 prominent Virginia families. Catherine was the daughter of Henry Blackburn, who owned a smaller but profitable plantation 30 miles south in Buckingham County. What the wedding guests did not know, and what Catherine herself would not discover for 3 more years, was that Thomas Whitfield III and Catherine Blackburn shared the same father. But Catherine was not suffering from puerile fever. She was suffering from knowledge that she could neither reveal nor forget. The truth that Hannah had revealed was destroying Catherine's life, while remaining completely invisible to everyone else. Understanding how this played out requires seeing the complete picture of what happened next. In early November, Catherine made a decision that would expose the truth, but at tremendous personal cost. She could no longer live with the knowledge alone. She needed her mother, Martha, to confirm or deny what Hannah had told her and what her own investigation had revealed. She wrote a letter to Martha Blackburn, carefully worded but direct in its essential question. Was Thomas Whitfield, too, the biological father of Sarah Blackburn, who was now Catherine Whitfield? Catherine sent the letter via a trusted enslaved messenger, instructing him to deliver it directly to Martha and wait for a response. This was highly unusual. Most correspondence between plantations went through normal postal channels. The urgency and secrecy suggested the letter's explosive content. Martha Blackburn read her daughter's letter in her private sitting room. The words on the page confirmed her worst fear, that the secret she had kept for 24 years was finally emerging. What followed was Martha's written confession delivered back to Whitfield Manor 3 days later. In careful handwriting, Martha explained what had happened in the summer of 1823. Thomas Whitfield, too, had visited the Blackburn plantation in 1823 to discuss business with Henry. During his 3-month stay, Thomas and Martha had developed an affair. Martha described it as consensual, though the power dynamics between a visiting wealthy planter and a married woman in a hierarchical society made true consent questionable. Martha became pregnant. She was certain the child was Thomas Whitfield, too, not Henry's, because Henry had been traveling extensively during the period of conception. Martha considered various desperate options, claiming illness to explain the timing, seeking abortion through herbal remedies that could be deadly, or even running away. Instead, she manipulated the situation to make Henry believe he was the father. When he returned from his travels, she resumed intimate relations with him, then later claimed the pregnancy as his. Henry, having no reason to suspect otherwise, accepted Sarah as his legitimate daughter. Martha's letter to Catherine explained that she had lived with this guilt for 24 years. She had watched Sarah grow up, knowing that Henry Blackburn was not her biological father, but unable to reveal the truth without destroying their family. When Sarah married Thomas Whitfield III, Martha had experienced a different horror, realizing that her daughter was marrying her own half-brother. But Martha had convinced herself that the biological relationship was distant enough, or that perhaps she had been wrong about the paternity, or that some other rationalization would make the situation acceptable. She had remained silent during the courtship and wedding, watching her daughter marry into the family that carried her darkest secret. Catherine read her mother's letter multiple times, each reading confirming the nightmare. Her mother had known. Martha had known that Catherine was marrying her own half-brother and had said nothing. The betrayal felt even more devastating than the original revelation. Catherine now had written confirmation from her own mother that she was the biological daughter of Thomas Whitfield, too. She was married to her own half-brother. Her son was born of incest, and her mother had known and remained silent. The rage that followed this realization gave Catherine a clarity she had lacked for months. She would not remain silent. She would not protect the families who had created this situation through sexual exploitation and willful ignorance. She would expose the truth, regardless of the consequences. The Whitfield family had planned a gathering for November 14th to celebrate the baby's baptism. Neighboring plantation families were invited, including several of the most prominent names in Albemarle County. The baptism would formally welcome the baby into the Episcopal Church and into Virginia society. Catherine waited until the gathering was assembled. Thomas Whitfield III, his mother Eleanor, neighboring planters and their wives, the Episcopal minister who would perform the baptism, and approximately 25 guests total. In the parlor of Whitfield Manor, surrounded by the elite of Virginia plantation society, Catherine Whitfield revealed the truth. She began by displaying the baby's birthmark. She then produced documents from her investigation, plantation records showing Thomas Whitfield II's visits to the Blackburn plantation in 1823, her mother Martha's letter confessing the affair and confirming Catherine's true paternity, and Hannah's testimony about delivering multiple babies carrying the distinctive birthmark. Catherine explained in a voice that started quiet but grew stronger that she was the biological daughter of Thomas Whitfield II, that she had married her own half-brother, that her son was born of incest, and that the truth had been hidden by sexual exploitation, willful ignorance, and a system that treated enslaved people's knowledge as irrelevant. The reaction in the parlor was immediate shock followed by denial. Thomas Whitfield III demanded that Catherine stop this madness. Eleanor Whitfield called for the doctor, insisting that her daughter-in-law was suffering from puerile insanity. The Episcopal minister suggested prayer and rest, but Catherine had evidence. She had her mother's written confession. She had Hannah, whom she brought into the parlor to testify about delivering multiple babies with identical birthmarks. She had plantation records that confirmed timelines and visits. The gathering dissolved into chaos. Some guests left immediately, unwilling to be associated with such scandal. Others remained, demanding additional proof or insisting that Catherine was suffering from illness. Thomas III alternated between rage and devastation, torn between denying the accusations and beginning to recognize their truth. The Episcopal minister refused to perform the baptism under these circumstances. He stated that further investigation would be required before the church could bless a child born of potentially incestuous relations. Eleanor Whitfield ordered Hannah removed from the parlor and confined to the quarters, declaring that the enslaved midwife had poisoned Catherine's mind with lies. But Eleanor's outrage seemed forced, suggesting that she might have suspected the truth about her late husband's activities all along. As the sun set on November 14th, Whitfield Manor was in turmoil. Most guests had departed. Thomas III had locked himself in his study with several bottles of whiskey. Eleanor had retired to her room, claiming illness. Catherine remained in the parlor with her infant son, exhausted but strangely calm now that the truth was finally revealed. Hannah, confined to the slave quarters, understood that she would likely be sold as punishment for her role in exposing the family's secrets. Enslaved people throughout the plantation whispered about what had happened, amazed that the truth had finally been spoken in front of white witnesses. The consequences of Catherine's revelation would unfold over the following months, destroying families and forcing Virginia Plantation Society to confront truths it preferred to ignore. The scandal that Catherine Whitfield had exposed could not be contained. Despite efforts by the family to suppress the story, news spread through Virginia's Plantation Society with remarkable speed. Enslaved people carried the story between plantations. White servants gossiped with neighbors. The families who had attended the failed baptism shared what they had witnessed. By December, the revelation had reached Charlottesville society and beyond. Newspapers would not print such scandalous details, but private letters and conversations ensured that everyone in the region knew about the incestuous relationship revealed at Whitfield Manor. Thomas III faced impossible choices. His marriage to Catherine was legally valid, but now revealed to be half-siblings. Virginia law did not specifically address marriages between individuals who were biologically related but did not know of their relationship when they married. The Northern abolitionists. In the increasingly tense political climate of the late 1840s, with sectional conflict intensifying over slavery's expansion, Catherine's letters were seen as betrayal of the South itself. The custody dispute over Catherine's son continued through spring 1848. Thomas Whitfield III sought to have Catherine declared legally incompetent, which would allow him to assume full custody of the child and institutionalize Catherine in an asylum. This was not uncommon. White women who challenged patriarchal authority were often declared insane and confined. Catherine fought the competency proceedings with remarkable determination. She hired a lawyer from Charlottesville who was sympathetic to her situation, though even he advised her to stop writing letters to abolitionists and to moderate her public statements. The legal proceedings revealed more details about the Whitfield family's history. Plantation records were examined. Enslaved people were questioned, though their testimony had no legal weight. Multiple witnesses confirmed that Thomas Whitfield II had fathered numerous children among the enslaved population. What the court struggled with was the question of whether Catherine's marriage to Thomas III was valid. Virginia law prohibited marriages between siblings, but that prohibition assumed the siblings knew of their relationship before marriage. Catherine and Thomas had been unaware of their biological connection when they married in 1844. The legal and social consequences of Catherine's revelation would reshape multiple families and expose contradictions at the heart of plantation society. The resolution would reveal just how far the system would go to protect itself. In July 1848, the Albemarle County Court issued its ruling on the custody dispute. The judge acknowledged that Catherine had been telling the truth about her biological relationship to Thomas Whitfield III. The evidence was too overwhelming to deny. However, the court ruled that Catherine had acted improperly by exposing private family matters publicly and by corresponding with Northern abolitionists. These actions, the judge argued, demonstrated unsound judgment that made her unfit to raise her son. Custody was awarded to Thomas Whitfield III, with the stipulation that the child be raised primarily by Eleanor Whitfield and eventually sent to boarding school in another state. Catherine was granted limited visiting rights, but was prohibited from discussing the circumstances of the child's conception with anyone. The marriage between Catherine and Thomas was annulled on the grounds that it was contracted between half-siblings, even though neither party knew of the relationship at the time. The annulment declared that the marriage had never been legally valid, which technically made the child illegitimate, despite his parents having been legally married at his birth. Catherine was ordered to leave Whitfield's manor within 30 days and to cease all correspondence with abolitionist publications. Catherine left Virginia in August 1848, moving to Philadelphia, where she had developed contacts with the abolitionist community. She would spend the rest of her life advocating for slavery's abolition, using her own experience as evidence of the system's corruption. Her testimony appeared in abolitionist publications throughout the 1850s. She spoke at women's rights conventions, drawing connections between women's legal subordination in marriage and enslaved people's complete lack of legal personhood. She became a controversial figure, celebrated by abolitionists as a courageous truth-teller, condemned by Southern society as a madwoman and traitor. Catherine never saw her son again after leaving Virginia. Letters she wrote to him were intercepted by the Whitfield family and destroyed. She died in 1862 in Philadelphia, having witnessed the beginning of the Civil War that would finally end the system she had spent years condemning. Hannah's fate took a different path. Sold to a Mississippi plantation in January 1848, she continued working as a midwife until emancipation in 1865. After the Civil War, she testified to Freedmen's Bureau representatives about her experiences in Virginia, including the revelation she had made to Catherine Whitfield. Her testimony was recorded in archives that historians would not examine until the 20th century. Hannah lived until 1879, dying in Mississippi at age 78, having delivered over 400 babies during her lifetime. Her knowledge of midwifery and her crucial role in exposing the truth at Whitfield Manor were largely forgotten by history. Catherine and Thomas's son, born into such complicated circumstances in August 1847, was raised by his grandmother, Eleanor Whitfield, until age 10. He was then sent to boarding school in Massachusetts, far from Virginia and the scandal that surrounded his origins. The boy grew up knowing only a carefully edited version of his family history. He was told that his mother had suffered from mental illness and that his parents' marriage had been annulled for unspecified reasons. He learned nothing about the incestuous relationship or the enslaved midwife who had revealed the truth. He eventually changed his name, distancing himself from both the Whitfield and Blackburn families. He built a life in Boston, married, and had his own children. His descendants would not learn the truth about their ancestry until the late 20th century, when historians examining antebellum Virginia plantation records uncovered the story of Catherine's revelation and Hannah's testimony. The story of Catherine Whitfield and Hannah the midwife was deliberately suppressed in Virginia historical records. The families involved worked to ensure that official histories would not include details of the scandal. County records mentioned the annulled marriage, but provided no explanation. Catherine's letters to abolitionist publications were published under pseudonyms that obscured her identity. For over a century, the truth remained buried in scattered archives, a court record here, an abolitionist newspaper there, testimony recorded by the Freedmen's Bureau after the Civil War. Only when historians began systematically examining enslaved people's testimonies and tracing family genealogies through DNA analysis did the full story emerge. Modern historical research has revealed that Catherine's case, while dramatic, was not unique. Sexual exploitation of enslaved women by white men was endemic throughout the antebellum South. Historians estimate that by 1860, between 10 and 20% of enslaved people had significant European ancestry resulting from this exploitation. Hidden biological relationships across racial boundaries were common. Enslaved people frequently knew which white men had fathered which children, information that white society refused to acknowledge. Midwives like Hannah were among the few people who understood the complete genealogical networks that connected families across the rigid boundaries of race and legal status. Their knowledge gave them limited power. They could choose whether to reveal truths that would damage white families, though such revelations often resulted in punishment. More commonly, they used their knowledge to provide medical care, maintain family connections within enslaved communities, and preserve oral histories that official records would never record. Hannah's decision to whisper the truth to Catherine Whitfield on August 23, 1847, changed multiple lives. Catherine's son would grow up in different circumstances because of that revelation. Catherine herself would become an abolitionist advocate whose testimony influenced Northern opinion. The Whitfield and Blackburn families would be permanently scarred by the exposure of secrets they had worked to hide. Whether Hannah's decision was justified remains debatable. Some argue that revealing the truth caused unnecessary suffering, particularly for Catherine and her infant son. Others contend that exposing the sexual exploitation and biological realities that slavery created was necessary resistance against a fundamentally unjust system. The story reveals contradictions at the heart of antebellum Southern society. Plantation owners claimed that racial hierarchies were natural and immutable, yet they regularly fathered children with enslaved women. They insisted that enslaved people were inferior and incapable of sophisticated reasoning, yet they feared the knowledge that enslaved midwives possessed. They built elaborate social conventions to maintain racial boundaries, yet those boundaries were constantly crossed through sexual exploitation. They treated enslaved people as property without legal personhood, yet they lived in constant fear of enslaved people's resistance, knowledge, and testimony. Catherine Whitfield's